In this video, I'm gonna teach you how to beat every boss in BTD6. We'll look at one boss at a time, go through all of the mechanics of that boss, and then list the best strategies for each of the 5 tiers for normal and elite. On top of that, we'll also finish the video by showing you how to farm better and give you some general tips and tricks for bossing. Starting off with the least complex boss, Bloonarius. This guy does not have a lot of mechanics, but instead is a giant bullet sponge with tons of HP. Once you get him down to 99% of his HP, he will start to bleed out smaller bloons that will spawn anywhere from the start of the track to 75% of the way through the track, and he will do that for every 1% of his HP. These bloons are not very strong relative to the defense you should have at that point, but you need to have at least something to deal with the bloons that spawn far along the track. On top of that, he also spawns stronger bloons out of his mouth every time you finish a portion of his HP. For normal, his HP is split into 4 parts, meaning 3 skulls that will spawn these bloons, and for elite it's split up into 8 portions, meaning he will spawn 7 rushes of bloons. These bloons, as mentioned, are stronger than the bleed bloons, so we will need to consider them carefully when we plan our setups for each tier. The rushes for each tier can be seen here. And that's it for the mechanics of Bloonarius. The first boss tier always comes on round 40 no matter which boss you're playing, and then every 20 rounds from then on, and you need to defeat the boss before 20 rounds has passed, so if tier 1 is not defeated by round 60 for example, you instantly lose. Now let's take a look at some strategies, starting with the normal version of the boss. For these strategies, I will assume that your farming is not great, so no setup should be very hard to afford, and I'm also going to over-defend a bit, so that each tier should be fairly safe. All of the setups assumes no buffs or debuffs unless specifically stated for simplicity reasons, so if you want to add some to make it even easier, go ahead. Note that the setups does not take into account the normal round, so if there are for example some camo bloons, you need to deal with that on your own, but I think you can handle it. For tier 1, the best solution is the 104 sticky bomb to take down the boss very quickly and cheaply. Now we just need something to deal with the insides. A 402 more glaives boomerang combined with the top path alchemist is great, because it will not only deal with the rushes at each skull, but also the bleed bloons if placed well. Worth noting is that for a lot of these setups, the towers that are meant to target the boss, you want to remember to set the targeting of that tower to strong, since we already have other towers that will deal with the weaker bloons. It's important to know more than one way to defeat each tier, as each week's boss event can be different because of some towers being banned, the boss having more HP, or ability cooldowns being longer or shorter, so here are some more ways to beat the first tier in order of their cost, but keep in mind that the cheapest solution is not always the best. And here are the options for the rushes. If you're on a more difficult map with not a lot of great placements for the towers that deal with the rushes, you may want to get 2 of them, and beware that the recursive cluster can't pop zebra or black bloons, which makes them problematic. For tier 2 we have a lot of similar towers as on tier 1 for the insides, and as for boss damage, a Master Bomber or Mad will tear the boss to pieces in no time, but an elite defender works too. For tier 3, the go-to option is for sure again the Mad, because it can attack the boss anywhere on the map, but an Avatar of Wrath with some Populous Druids are slightly cheaper, and with that setup you don't need anything for the rushes. For tier 4, just get a degree 1 Dart Paragon or Boomerang Paragon. For each of these options you should have the insides taken care of with the same towers, but you can always add a Spirit of the Forest if you are concerned. For tier 5 you want to get a stronger Paragon. A degree 20 Boomerang Paragon will get the job done without needing anything else for the insides. Creating a Paragon that is degree 20 plus is really easy. You don't need to save up any pops from previous tier to add to its power. The cheapest way is to create 25 sacrifices with 2 upgrades on the cheapest paths and inject 0 cash. But if you're good on money, you can just inject some cash and save yourself the hassle. I won't be giving solutions that don't involve paragons, so if you don't have them unlocked, you should probably get working on that. In the meantime, non-paragon solutions for most tiers are just a combination of the strongest towers like the TSG, Mad, Super Mines, etc., plus a lot of Sun avatars and all of the buffs and debuffs. Now let's move on to the elite version of the boss. It has the same mechanics as the normal one, except it has a lot more HP, and the bloons that it spawns are a lot stronger. From this point on, I may not commentate over every single strategy in order to save time, but instead I'll give you some relevant thoughts. Since elite is a lot harder, your farming will need to get a lot better as well. Another thing that can help you is sometimes you may want to keep towers that you used for one tier and use it for the next one as well. A common example for Elite is getting a degree 20 Paragon for tier 3 and keeping it for tier 4, along with getting an additional Paragon to degree 40 that you can keep on tier 5, but my setups will list degree 1 Paragons if they can beat the boss. That's why you see a plus sign on the recommended degree. For the suggested solutions for tier 3 and 4, it's good to overshoot so that you can have them be useful for the next tier. Overall, Bloonarius is a very good boss for beginners, even though it has a lot of HP. Its mechanics are the simplest, and that's what matters most when you're just starting out. For the next boss we have Lych. This boss is a bit weaker than Bloonarius, but is also faster. Lych has more mechanics, with the most notable one being that it steals temporary buffs. If the boss gets too close to, say, a tower being buffed by an alchemist, then Lych will take away the buff and he will also heal his HP. The area in which Lych can steal buffs is about the same as Quincy's range for tier 1 to 4, but on tier 5 it can steal buffs anywhere on the map. This means that you should stick to permanent buffs such as jungle drums. Lych also heals when you sell your towers, and it heals more the higher the tier of the tower being sold, so avoid selling anything during the boss fight. For each skull, Lych will spawn the Lych Soul, a miniature version of itself. While the soul is on the map, Lych is invulnerable and moves at half the speed. The soul is quite fast, so it needs to be taken down quick. The soul also drains a certain amount of lives for every 4 seconds that it's alive. The amount of lives depends on the tier and the difficulty you are playing, and can be quite significant, so having something to regain lives, such as the hero Ben, bottom path farm, spirit of the forest, or a middle path heli, will help you out a lot. On top of spawning the soul, Lych also brings Moabs that you popped in the last 20 seconds back to life in the place that you popped them in form of chained Moabs. These have a lot more HP than normal, but they don't spawn any child bloons when popped. For Lych to exit his invulnerability, these chained Moabs also needs to be destroyed along with the soul. If you do so very quickly, he may remain invulnerable for a few more seconds still, because it always lasts for a minimum of 7.5 seconds no matter how fast you destroy the soul and the chained Moabs. Lych also spawns a few extra Moabs and modifies some rounds from what they normally are, although this does not change the boss fight significantly. The Elite version is not only stronger but also faster than the normal version, unlike Bloonarius, where the speed is the same for both difficulties. The Elite version has 7 skulls while the normal one has 5, and Elite Lych also stuns towers for 5 seconds if it steals a buff from them, and the Moabs that he summons are even stronger and faster. And that's it for the mechanics. Now let's take a look at some strategies, starting with the normal difficulty. For this boss, you won't need anything specific for the soul and the chained Moabs. As long as you have a good setup for the boss itself, these towers will be able to handle them too. But as I said before, you may need a little something to deal with the regular bloons that come during the rounds for the earlier tiers, depending on which setup you go for. On normal difficulty, the lives that are drained are not an issue in the early tiers, and for the later tiers, just a few towers to add to your HP will suffice, but for Elite you will need to think about it a bit more. Now let's take a look at the Elite setups. If you're using the Elite Defender for tier 1, remember to place him far away from the boss. The Elite Defender gains 4 times the attack speed for 7 seconds whenever you lose a life, and the soul will trigger this effect, which will make the sniper shred the boss, but the effect counts as a temporary buff, so if you place him too close, this will heal Lych when he drains his buff. If using the Moab Assassin strat for tier 1, which is more expensive and harder, make sure to not spam the abilities, but spread them out, using some on the boss and some on the soul and chained Moabs. The same thing for normal also goes for Elite when it comes to the insides for each tier. You won't need anything for them specifically, but you may need a little something to deal with the regular rounds. For tier 5, again you want to make 3+ strong paragons, degree 20+ and 40+, and a good example would be a ninja, boat and ace paragon. Next we have one of my personal favorites, Vortex. This one doesn't have too many mechanics, just a few basic ones. First of all, Vortex is very weak, but super fast, and he gets faster for every tier and even faster on Elite difficulty. Like most bosses, the normal version has 3 skulls while Elite has 7. Each time you pop a skull, Vortex will get knocked back on the track, generate a shield around him and stun any nearby towers. Towers that are stunned cannot attack and cannot be sold until this effect naturally wears off, and the radius that Vortex stuns towers in grows for each tier. The temporary shield that he generates makes every projectile bounce off of it, protecting him fully, but some towers can still damage him, like the Plasma Accelerator, Ray of Doom, Snipers, Mortars, Submarine Missiles, and some Paragon attacks. Vortex also regularly clears the track near him of any projectiles or collectibles, so spikes from spike factories, balloon traps, or bananas will get destroyed if they are near him. He also speeds up other balloons by 2.5x until they catch up to his position on the track. If you're playing on a map with more than one track, the balloons that are sped up on a different track than Vortex will stay sped up throughout the whole track. Vortex also alters some rounds, but again, this is nothing significant, so don't think about it. The elite version of the boss is the same as the normal one, except more speed, HP, number of skulls, clears the track of projectiles twice as often, and has longer stun durations. Now let's get to the strategies. For normal, you have a few pretty good options for tier 1 and 2. Just remember to place the towers far away from the track, and if you go with the submarine option, you need to place some towers like 002 darts near the track to give the subs global range. For tier 3, using just one of these towers can work on a really easy map, but in most cases I recommend combining 2 of these towers, whichever you like. For tier 4, you can easily make it work with a degree 20 dart or boomerang paragon, but they need to be placed very well so that they can attack the boss, but not so close that they can get stunned. A degree 1 ninja, sub, or boat paragon is safer. And lastly, for tier 5, a degree 20 ninja, degree 40 sub, or degree 1 ace paragon can solo the boss without hiccups. Now let's try Elite. For tier 1, using the Elite Defender and leaking a few balloons to increase its attack speed is your best option, but there are non-micro options as well. Tier 2, the Mad and Rod are great, but if none of those are available, a Flying Fortress with an overclock will get it done. Tier 3, any of these paragons can shred the boss easily. Again, with the Dart and Boomerang paragon, the placement needs to be good, but with the Sub and Ninja you can place them far away. Tier 4, the Sub, Ninja or Ace Paragon will take down the boss on their own. You can also use other paragons, but these are far superior for this boss. For tier 5, you really want a degree 40 plus Ace Paragon, as there just isn't anything else that can compare against it at this tier for this boss. You also want to combine it with 1 or 2 more of the following paragons with at least degree 20. If you don't have the Ace Paragon available, then you probably want to get 4 paragons, degree 20 plus and 40 plus, and be very careful with the placements to minimize stuns. The next boss is Dreadbloon. This boss has 3 skulls on both normal and elite, and each skull has an immunity. The first skull is primary, then military, then magic, and then support. During each skull, there is one category of towers that cannot damage the boss at all, and this includes paragons from those categories. Each skull begins with a rock armor before you can start taking down Dreadbloon's normal HP, and when this rock armor is active, he moves a lot slower than he does when the armor is down. On top of this, he also continuously spawns rock balloons when his armor is up, with the exception being the first skull where he does not spawn these balloons. Rock balloons are very tough and cannot be slowed down or stunned. These balloons also have the same immunities as the boss, and they steal the strong prioritization from the boss, meaning if you have a tower set to strong because you want it to target the boss, it will instead target the rock balloons. And even though they are balloons, they count as if they were mini bosses, so they are vulnerable to towers that deal bonus damage against Moabs and bosses. He's got a decent amount of HP, counting with the rock armor, which stands for 2/3 of his total HP. This boss is quite tough considering the immunities that will cause your total damage that you can do to the boss to shrink significantly. Once you take down the rock armor, Dreadbloon will stop spawning the rock balloons and he will now start moving faster. Under his rock armor he's made of lead, so to damage him now you need something that can pop lead balloons. While he has the lead property, he also reduces all the incoming damage by set amounts. For normal, any damage is reduced by 1, and for elite, this increases to 2 at tier 4 and to 3 at tier 5. This means that if you're attacking with a tower that only does 1 damage per projectile, it will be resisted and do 0 damage against Dreadbloon when his armor is down, so fast attacking low damage towers are at a disadvantage. Other than the elite version reducing more damage than the normal one, it also has more speed and HP, and same for the rock bloons, and the rock bloons also cost more lives if you leak them. For both normal and elite, some rounds are changed and some bloons will be replaced by other ones, so for this boss the round modifiers are actually something to take note of. You will see more fortified bloons and Moabs and a lot more lead bloons since they entirely replace zebra bloons, and this is something you can make use of in your farming by having a lead to gold alchemist. And that's it for the mechanics. Now let's take a look at the strategies. For tier 1 I got loads of different combos. For the ones including turbocharge, try to alternate the abilities so that you almost always have one of them active. For each tier you won't need anything extra for the rock bloons, as the setups I've chosen can handle them as well on most maps, so the only thing you need to think of are the normal rounds. For tier 2 I gave you 4 different combos, and for tier 3 you can choose to combine any 2 of these options. For tier 4, any 2 paragons from 2 different categories just to degree 1 will shred the boss, and for tier 5 it's the same thing, except if you go for the dart paragon it needs to be at least degree 40 unless you're playing on a map it's really good on. For this boss, remember to place your towers where the boss is going to be when they can actually do damage to him. For example, primary towers can't do damage to the first skull, so don't put them at the very start of the track, and for support towers don't put them at the very back. Now let's look at elite. For tier 1 we got some similar options as on normal. For tier 2 you want to pick 2 of these options from different categories, and for tier 3 you want to have a dart paragon degree 20 or a boomerang paragon degree 1 combined with some other tower that can take down the first skull. For tier 4, pick 2 paragons at least degree 1 from 2 different categories, but remember again these are just minimums. If you can get a degree 20 or higher to keep for the next tier, do that instead. And finally for tier 5, choosing at least 2 strong paragons from 2 or more categories will be able to take down the boss with ease. Now we have 2 bosses left, and the first one is Phayze. Phayze begins each skull with a reality shield, and he moves faster when the shield is active, but still pretty slow. But he also has a good amount of HP and also a lot of tough mechanics. First of all, it has the camo property, so all towers need to see camo in order to damage it. A tower with inherent camo detection, like for example the Ninja Monkey, the Middle Path Dartling, or Paragons can always damage Phayze. But towers that are given camo detection from other sources, such as villages or Geraldo's camo pots, will have their camo detection removed once every 24 seconds when Phayze activates its radar jammer, which blocks these effects for 12 seconds. If you used a decamo option to remove the camo property of the boss, it will regain its camo and block any decamo attacks for 12 seconds as well. All this means that any tower that does not have inherent camo detection will only be able to do damage 50% of the time, making them a lot less cost efficient. Radar Jam also pulls bloons to the boss's location and grants nearby bloons the camo property. If a Moab gets popped while being pulled, the insides will instantly teleport to the location it was being pulled to. Each time you reach a skull, the boss will warp 8% of the track's length forward, and he is immune to any projectiles while he is warping. He also opens up a portal from the position that he warped from. This portal will now be the new spawning point for the bloons you see on regular rounds. On top of all this, each time he reaches a skull, he will also slow down all of your towers more and more for each skull. So towards the end of the fight, every tower will be a lot slower. And finally, he also changes some rounds, but nothing worth worrying about. The differences between normal and elite is that elite is stronger and faster, has 5 skulls instead of 3, and also slows down your towers a lot more. Now let's talk strategy, starting with the normal version. For tier 1 you can get away with just 1 sticky bomb for the boss damage if the track loops around itself so that he can attack for a big portion of the track, otherwise I would take another option. For tier 2, you got a bunch of good options that will take down the boss with ease, with the Sky Shredder being my cheapest recommendation. For tier 3, choose any 2 of these suggestions and you will be all set. For tier 4, one of these following paragons will solo the boss, and lastly, for tier 5, you want to go with one of these. Now let's take down the elite version. For tier 1 you have a bunch of options. If you go with the elite defender, don't be afraid to leak a balloon or two to make the sniper attack faster, as you may need to do that on shorter maps. For tier 2, the Mad reigns supreme as it often does, but there are a few other options too, although a bit more expensive. At tier 3 you want to get a Dart Paragon or Boomerang Paragon at degree 20, or a more expensive one at degree 1. Tier 4 we head to some more expensive paragons, and we also want them to be of a decent degree so that they can easily solo the boss. And finally on tier 5 we want to get 3 strong paragons. Combining any 3 of these should do the trick. Now we will take a look at the last boss, Blastapopoulus. This boss has the purple balloon property, so something like a plasma accelerator that cannot damage a purple balloon cannot damage the boss unless you use an MIB, but that will cause the heat bar to fill up faster. The heat bar under his HP fills up by 1 for every projectile that hits him, no matter how much damage they do, and it fills up even faster if you attack him with anything that normally would not pop a purple balloon, and attacking him with an ice monkey lowers the temperature of the heat bar. When the heat bar fills up all the way, a heat wave will engulf the area, stunning all towers for 5 seconds and putting all abilities on a 10-second cooldown. For the next 20 seconds after he overheated, the heat bar will stay full and cap the lifespan of all projectiles to 0.2 seconds, and that will cause some projectiles to not hit him, and after that the heat bar resets. Also worth noting is that when the boss spawns, his heat bar is already full, causing this effect to take place for the first time right as he spawns. For each skull, Blastapopoulus becomes immune to all damage for 2 seconds, heats up the bar by 25%, and also launches 3 meteors that will hit the most expensive tower, the closest tower, and the tower furthest away. These meteors will stun them for 4 seconds and also prevent them from being sold, reduce the range by 20%, freeze their ability cooldown, and reduce the attack speed by 33%, all for 15 seconds. On top of these meteors, each time you pop a skull, he also sends out pyroclastic rocks that land in a circle around him, acting as line-of-sight blockers that prevent many kinds of towers from being able to attack him if a rock is in the way. And if a rock lands right on top of a tower, it won't be able to see in any direction until the rock disappears. While the boss is on the track, all towers have their range reduced by 15%, and your abilities will take longer to come off cooldown, and the time it takes increases with every tier. It also removes all damage over time effects every 2 seconds, including sticky bombs. The differences between normal and elite is that the elite version is stronger, has 7 skulls instead of 4, spawns 8 rocks around him for protection instead of 6, and the added ability cooldown when he overheats is 15 seconds instead of 10. While he is stronger on elite, the heat bar has the same maximum values as on normal, so when playing elite he will overheat more often. And now we're ready to talk strategy. For tier 1 you don't need very much, any one of these setups will do the trick. For tier 2, an elite defender or Moab Elim will get the job done, but if you want it done quick, go for the Avatar of Wrath or the Mad. Tier 3, combine 2 of the listed options, no buffs are needed. For tier 4, almost any Paragon degree 1 will do the trick, but the Ninja Paragon is horrible value for money since its sticky bomb gets removed by the boss and many NG Paragon attacks can't damage the boss at all. And finally, for tier 5 you can combine any 2 of these paragons. Here I want to remind you about the boss stunning the most expensive tower, closest tower, and the tower furthest away. This means that on some tiers you want to have either something else that can handle the normal rounds, or place a cheap tower in the corner of the map and near the boss and let them catch 2 of the meteors. Now let's move on to Elite. For tier 1, the Elite Defender will take down the boss for a relatively cheap price, while the Elim will be the fastest. For tier 2, the Mad will be the best option most of the time, except if the track loops around in a small circle. Then the Avatar of Wrath will get the job done faster despite the range nerfs. For tier 3, any one of these paragons will do. I'd say the boomerang paragon is the way to go, but others work fine too. For tier 4, any two of these paragons should do the trick, but remember that when playing on Elite you often want to get a degree 40 instead of 20 and keep it for tier 5. And for the last tier, you really want to get a high degree ace paragon. Even without it, you should be fine if you can get 3+ paragons above degree 40. And remember to place out dart monkeys to catch the meteors for closest and furthest away from the boss. And that's every boss in BTD6. Now let's look at farming and then some general tips and tricks. I've already made a full farming guide that takes you all the way from beginner to advanced, which I highly recommend you check out if you're new to bossing. That video will give you all you need for normal and elite bosses. But the best farming strategy, except for IMF farming, has changed since that video, so I will go ahead and show you the new way to do it now. But don't get turned off by this if you are a new player. You don't need farming even close to this advanced to beat elite bosses. Just use the other farming guide instead. This strat is mostly used for ranked bossing. But one thing that you can take away from this example is that it's important to not over-defend the early game. A lot of beginners use way too much defense in the first 40 rounds, which really hurts the snowballing of their farming later on. You're not going to lose any lives after round 40 anyway, so make use of those lives by leaking a few bloons if you need to in order to focus more on the farming. For the beginners, you should always get Ben or Geraldo as your hero if you have the chance. The extra money you make from them far outweighs any damage from any hero by miles, and in this example I'm using Ben. Here I'm using a base sub, a dart, and a 102 boomerang for defense in the beginning before I eventually get a bloon trap. I begin by getting a 220 farm and a 202 farm and then selling the latter to upgrade the other one to a bank. Once the bank is full, I take out the money and upgrade it to an IMF and get 2 more 202 farms. Then, at the end of round 30, I sell them and deposit my money back into the bank and make sure I don't finish the rounds too quickly by selling my sub, so I will have the ability up in 2 rounds. Then I get 3 discount villages and a monkey town next to them, place an NG that will become my bloon trap and also a dart monkey for the camo bloons. I sell my 2 discount villages that I placed first, and then I use the IMF ability at the start of a round and sacrifice it to the Opolis. Then I get working on another farm and get the bloon trap, which I keep retargeting to the same location over and over so he refreshes it more often, and after that it's time for a glue gunner and a rubber to gold alch. I get rid of the dart monkey and I finish by upgrading the glue, getting 2 more farms and a favor trades. In this example I was far from fully optimized and I was playing on a very easy map to farm on, but despite this I managed to get over 70k for round 40. I didn't go into very much detail here, because the video isn't meant to be an advanced guide, but I wanted to at least update you on the best farming method. If you want a closer look, I will link 2 videos by Overclock in the description, which takes things a lot slower if you want to learn the best farming strategy using Ben or Geraldo. Now for some general bossing tips. As mentioned, you should try to get higher degree paragons than the minimum I recommended for tier 4, so that you can keep them for tier 5 and still have them be useful. If you can, you also want to start getting pops for your tier 5 paragons sometime during the mid-game. A good example would be having a flying fortress for tier 3 or 4, so that once tier 5 comes you can save some money on the sacrifices. Trying to farm while taking down the boss can be stressful, so prepare a good setup and plan ahead of time what farms you want to place where. A thing I used to do when playing bosses for the first time was basically I would get so stressed out by the boss being on screen that I didn't continue adding more farms until the fight was over, but that will cost you a huge amount of money. For Bloonarius tier 4 and 5, there's a bug you can use to your advantage with the rushes. If you back out of the game and go back in after he sends out a rush, that rush of mob class balloons will reset to their base HP that they normally have on round 80 instead of the health they have at round 100 or 120. It's also important that I mention why the paragon degrees I recommend is always in increments of 20 degrees. Paragons get stronger for every degree, but for every 20 degrees they get a significant buff, so you always want to aim for those numbers. And I also want to say, don't be afraid of playing ranked bossing. Everything is exactly the same except you get placed on the leaderboard. Even if you get a bad rank, you will still get some extra rewards over just completing the boss, so it's pretty much free stuff. So now you might wonder, what do I do if the boss is harder than normal? What if there's 150 or 200% HP or speed? Well, then you should try one of the more expensive suggestions for that tier, and if even that doesn't work, then try a solution from the next tier. And as time moves on, you will have even more towers and paragons to choose from, like the TAC Paragon that is about to be released in a matter of days. But if even that doesn't get you over the edge, or if there is a really unusual boss event with 400, 500% HP or speed, or if it's on an expert map or something like that, you can always lend a helping hand from Punji. He uploads a new guide for every single boss event every Saturday morning so that you can follow along if you can't do it on your own, and his channel is linked in the description below. With this video and my farming guide, you should now have everything you need to get started taking down some bosses on your own. And also a quick thanks to Jackalip in the Discord for helping me out with some questions I had making this video. Please leave a like if you enjoyed it and comment your boss tips down below, and I will see you in the next one.